Okay, I think we will go right on to the first speaker here. We are really happy to have Jenny Selander from Karolinska Institutet here today. I've listened to Jenny several times before, and I know she has so many interesting studies going on, rather big ones often. She has taken an interest in exposure of the mother at work when she is pregnant, and what happens to the child afterwards, and when the child grows up. And you actually do look at different kind of exposure, but you will focus on noise today, I would guess.
Yes,
Thank
that's
you.
true. Thank you so much. Very nice to be here today. And it's true that I will focus on noise today. The title of my speak today is Occupational Noise Exposure During Pregnancy and Health Effects in the Mother and Child. And I'm an associate professor at the Unit of Occupational Medicine at Karolinska Institutet. Okay, so why focus on occupational exposure? Well, the women of childbearing ages are often occupationally active. The Medical Birth Registry actually showed that 78% of the expecting mothers in Sweden are occupationally active during pregnancy week 10 when they are registered. And among those who are working, 68% work full-time in the beginning of pregnancy, and 23% work part-time. So it's a lot of potentially exposed pregnancies each year, actually. And the pregnant women are exposed to a mixture of exposures at work, of course, not only noise. It's physically strenuous work, viruses, metals, whole body vibration, noise, of course, particles, air pollution, chemicals, work-related stress. And it all depends on the occupation they choose to work in. But this is very important when you study different kinds of exposures. Sometimes they do also correlate, and you need to adjust for other exposures. So exposure to noise during pregnancy, it was previously thought that the fetus was well protected from noise in the womb, actually. So it could hear the sound, but it was really reduced a lot on its way into the fetus. However, experimental studies show that that's not really true. High-frequency noise is attenuated quite well, so about 20 to 50 dB could be reduced on its way into the fetus. But low-frequency noise is not, actually. It's not attenuated that much. And there are even studies that showing that low-frequency noise can be amplified in its way into the fetus. Studies on guinea pigs and sheep, that's just like humans have a fully developed auditory system in the last trimester, have shown an increased risk of hearing dysfunction in offspring when mothers were exposed to high levels of noise, I would say, during pregnancy. Of course, we're speaking of very high, loud noise levels. So this is one of those studies, Richards et al., that have measured noise level outside and inside the womb. And this is a reduction, so the difference between the 2 points, outside and inside the womb next to the fetus ear. So for low frequency, this is low frequency, and high frequency, you can see a really change. The high frequency noise is quite reduced in this study, was 10 to 15 dB reduction. Of course, some were lower, but the low frequency noise weren't reduced at all, or even amplified. So that was a bit surprising. Of course, this is one study. Other studies have shown a similar sort of increase of reduction depending on frequency level, but not this amplification in other studies. So it's a bit different. But it's depending on frequency. That's sort of the consensus you can make from these experimental studies. So this makes you a bit concerned about the child's hearing, especially when they work in occupational noise exposure. It could be very, very loud. And they have these hearing protection devices they put on the mother, but of course not the belly. And that's why it's important to study if those exposures actually causes harmful health effects. But occupational noise also is a stressor, and it can affect fetal growth. So it's not only the auditory system, because noise is regarded as a stressor. It activates the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and the adrenal glands, binjurebarken, that coordinates the hormone response in the body, the endocrine system, releasing sort of stress hormones, cortisol, for instance. So during pregnancy, the mother and the fetus have their own sort of endocrine system and own stress response, and they're also integrated by the placenta, and these act as 3 separate neuroendocrine systems. So it's quite a vulnerable system when you're pregnant. So long-term noise exposure, during pregnancy can lead to, we think, preterm birth, low birth weight, being small for your gestational age, and hypertension, so high blood pressure in the mother, and preeclampsia. These are the suspected, I would say, sort of possible outcomes that are needed to be studied. Some studies have been made. For instance, if we go back to hearing, we have 3 nice epidemiological studies. A French study on 75 children to textile workers, a Canadian study on 131 children exposed to occupational noise, and a Brazilian study on 80 children. 2 showed an increased risk, 1 didn't show an increased risk of hearing damage caused by occupational exposure during pregnancy. But these studies are small, and of course, like all studies, have methodological problems, so there are more studies to need to be done. I will talk about our study soon. So we have made a study on occupational noise and hearing impairment. But first, I would also like to add that there are studies, of course, on occupational noise and fetal growth and preterm birth. In a recent review by Ristikowska, they found 8 sort of high-quality studies actually on this topic, and 5 of them showed a significant increase of effects on fetal growth and preterm birth in connected with high levels of occupational exposure. Sort of an increased risk of about 20 to 40% of a low birth weight and a small gestational age were connected to occupational noise exposure of high levels in studies using a population-based sample including different occupations, so a mixture of occupations. You can see higher associations when you study specific occupations. For instance, textile workers in China, we have this military personnel as well in this review. The association was stronger, but however, as you saw in my first slide, these studies limited to one occupation are in danger of reflecting other occupational differences than just noise exposure. Of course, you are exposed to a mixture of compounds. And if you study just one occupation, you are at risk at studying something else than noise as well. That you need a mixture, I think, to be able to reduce correlation with other occupational exposures. But some of those studies show very strong risks. However, most of these studies rely on subjective exposure assessments, small samples, and have a retrospective design. So we are in need to have more studies on this. We are doing our part, and I will tell you what we are doing. But please, if anyone else are interested in this field, we need more studies. So what are we doing then? We have a new nationwide population-based registry study. One is published and the other one is not. But it's the same registry, same study cohort. It's a mixture of our really nice registers we have here in Sweden. So it's the medical birth registry, the patient registry, the LISA registry. We have information on education, income, and so on. And the MIDAS registry, we have sick leave, parental leave, and all this informations. So we have a lot of data collected already. So we are actually combining it, and in the beginning we have information about 2.3 million births. When would you gather that kind of data? From this mixture, we could retrieve good data on confounding factors, mother's age, nationality, BMI. Since in the interview at the prenatal care facilities, the mothers are actually measured with height and weight. So you have the BMI measured from all mothers. The diagnosis, the family structure, questions on smoking, snuff use, and we have education and income from other registers. We also have, of course, child's gender parity and sort of diagnosis there. But they are also asking about occupation, and that's the key issue for us. So at the registration interview in pregnancy week 10, they are asking the mothers, what are you working with right now? And this we have coded from free text into occupational codes to be able to see where the mothers have been working. They also asked the question, are you working part-time, full-time, or not at all right now? So we have the occupation and we have the sort of how much they're working, at least at the beginning of pregnancy. But then we wanted to retrieve absence from the workplace the rest of the pregnancy. Because, of course, in the beginning is one thing, but what about the rest? So we gather data on parental leave, sick leave, and different kinds of beneficial leave of absence that you can get if you're pregnant and working in occupational exposures. So we have data on those to see who was there or not at the workplace. We also have data on unemployment and other occupational exposures through these job exposure matrices. Because this is the way we connect exposure with our data. We have something called a job exposure matrix. We can't measure it on 2 million people in retrospect. It's impossible. So what we do is to identify the occupation they have, and we have sort of an occupational code, and we connect it to this job exposure matrix that's conducted on measurement reports from different occupational sites all over Sweden that have been collected. So if you have occupational code, you also have a level of occupational noise exposure. And different, of course, in time. So 5-year or time bands and different levels of exposure. And this picture is 3 levels, below 75 dBA, 75 to 85, and over 85 dBA. So this is how we connect exposure to noise with our registry-based data. And we also have job exposure matrices on different exposures like chemicals, air pollution. We will build now one on whole body vibration, and we have one on physical strenuous work, for instance, as well. So this is a study that has been published, occupational noise during pregnancy and hearing impairment in children. We wanted to combine the information on are you working now, full-time, part-time, not at all, and how much there have been absence during pregnancy, to 3 subgroups. So those working full-time with less than 20 days leave of absence in the pregnancy, those who work part-time, and those who weren't really working. They said they weren't working, or they said they were working but then had a lot of days of leave of absence. And as you can see, even though we connect the mother's exposure with occupational code, with exposure, you could see no increase in the mothers that hadn't been working, hadn't been there. You can see a small increase, like 25 or 26-25%, but not statistically significant in the part-time workers. But those women who were there, who said they were working full-time in the beginning of pregnancy and had less than 20 days leave of absence, you can see a significant increased risk of hearing impairment in children connected with occupational noise exposure above 85 dB. We also wanted to study fetal growth, and this is to preliminary results, so not to be cited and so on, but we see a similar increase when we divide the mothers in a similar way, not working part-time, full-time. We see an increased risk of, in this case, small for gestational age when working in high levels of occupational exposure. And the same goes for low birth weight. We also see a significant increased risk in this. What is interesting is we don't see anything for part-time workers, but we see also a small increase in the middle exposed group, actually, for fetal growth. So the child might be stressed and therefore not grow enough when working in occupational exposures. But this is preliminary, so please cite other sources before it have been published. The project group consists of me and Per Gustafsson, Maria Albin, Lars Selander, Marie Levné, and Ulf Rosenhall. It's a mixture of people in Karolinska, Lund, and Karolinska and Lund in this project. So that's what's it from me. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you, Jenny. This was a very interesting presentation, and you had some really shocking information there. Aya will take some questions. I'm sure we are actually got started almost a bit too good this morning, so we are very well with time. So if you have questions to Jenny, please let them. Okay.
Oh, thank you. That was really exciting. I'm Ulrika Odén from Karolinska as well.
Okay.
I'm a pediatrician, and I was just interested to hear whether you have anything in the experimental literature supporting the theory that there's a causative effect of the noise when looking at the small for gestational age or low birth weight.
Yes. I just cited the epidemiological data here, but there are experimental studies. There are in animals, usually measuring sort of hormone levels, I will say, and
I guess it would be pretty easy to do, just
Yes.
expose
Mhm.
rat mothers or so for noise
Yeah.
and see.
But they are
Okay.
experimental studies, but I'm sorry, I can't really cite them here today for you.
Vinetta Fellman, Lund, Helsinki. I'm also a neonatologist. Thank you for this epidemiological data. It's very important. My question relates to the individuals. Do you have any prospective studies to show that what the real noise stress for the mother or for the woman is? Because just looking at an occupation, you don't really know what that person is doing. So we really would need to have the real numbers. How much was it affecting? And what about BMI of the mothers? That if you have a lot of good fat around the
Yeah, we adjusted for BMI actually, but not the weight gain during pregnancy, but we have that data as well. Yeah, there's a bit more insulation, that's true. But it's also important, of course, the child's weight is very dependent on the mother's weight, and sort of we have adjusted for BMI in our analysis, of course. And we also have adjusted for other occupational exposures. No, since high levels of occupational exposure is quite rare, so we have to have really big data. We don't have because this has already happened, so we haven't not the possibility to measure it now. Of course, perhaps we could. You mean identify the women and try to go to their workplace afterwards and just assess the noise there. It could be done, but this is data from 1986 to 2008, but the workplace could have changed quite a lot. So I will suggest a different kind of study instead to looking at that. Of course, but you don't want to expose pregnant women to something that's harmful. Just follow their own choices in life and to see if there is an increased risk. Yeah. So I'm not sure how to design sort of a measurement study there.
My name is Per Broms. I'm an medical audiologist here in Lund. I wonder, can you say anything about the noise damage to the hearing in those children with mothers who has been exposed to a great amount of noise?
Yeah, I can only see the diagnosis because we only follow them in registers, but it's the sensorineural hearing impairment and tinnitus, for instance.
And you can say that they are more damaged in those groups with mothers who has been exposed to high levels of noise than in other children, so to say.
We couldn't say the degree of we couldn't say something about that, only the diagnosis, that there are more children with that diagnosis in groups where the mother had high exposure during pregnancy.
That's interesting.
We have further time, actually. I have a question. When you mentioned there were 3 groups that stood out, and teachers were, of course, one of them. But there were correlations between low birth weight and those groups, special?
Okay, you mean the job exposure matrix
yes,
there? Yeah,
full-time exposure.
Well, the teachers would be included in the middle group there, I think. No, depending on the preschool teachers would be in the middle group, but maybe not. I haven't studied each occupation, only the combined assessment, actually, I would say. But they are included in the middle group. They are, I can say. So nothing on the hearing impairment because there's too low noise exposure, but fetal growth,
It's very
there's a risk.
We have time for one more question. Anybody? I have a question then. There was Kerstin. Yeah.
Jenny, you said that my name is Kerstin Persson-Way, and you said that you looked at the diagnosis of hearing outcome among the children. What type of diagnosis are you then referring to?
There's different kinds. Ulf Rosenhall is really the expert who helped us pick the diagnosis of hearing impairment. So it's all types of diagnoses that were connected to noise exposure. So we, for instance, left out ledningshinder, I'm sorry, I'm not the English term, and those kind of hearing impairment that could be done to viruses and to other kinds of exposures and genetic, and only looking at those who were noise exposure. So sensorineural, hörselnedsättning, and tinnitus were the two major groups, but also other smaller diagnoses that were related to noise exposure.